everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. So in this video, I'm going to share with you and break down two sets that I've actually known about for maybe about a decade or so. My problem was that actually it's twofold. First, the cards that I actually got for my collection are from another country, and secondly, I didn't know how to add them to my collection. And in fact, I actually forgot about them until quite recently. Those cards are these right here, and I bought a number of these cards. This is the 1933 Allen's Footballers set, and they are soccer cards or football cards, if you will, if you're from overseas. Um, the funny thing about these cards is that they are actually quite small. I've actually never seen these in person, so I was kind of surprised about their looks. I actually like them. I like them a lot, in fact. Um, my problem was that I didn't know how to add them to my collection, as I said before, and they are from another country, Australia, from Melbourne, in fact. And sometimes this is one of the biggest problems that we as collectors face, and we might not think about it at first, but if a card is from another country, it's not like it was, you know, now a decade or prior on eBay. There's also a little bit of a trust factor too when you're doing business overseas. Now, I do a lot of business with dealers overseas in England and Australia and France and Germany, and I've never really had much of a problem per se. My biggest gripe, I guess, from grabbing cards from overseas is that usually they're not going to be in like a protective holder. A lot of times they're gonna come in like saran wrap. I've had that happen, or something very flimsy, and it can destroy the card. And I'm not entirely sure if dealers overseas know how either A, expensive these cards are, or B, rare. And in the case of these cards right here, they're not found here in the United States. I've never come across any of these cards at shows, and I doubt that you will for a long time to come. The majority of these cards are actually found still overseas, which kind of makes it a problem. Um, because these cards are found overseas, I didn't know how to buy them overseas, and I did have a problem with trust. You know, you really need to kind of trust the dealer that you're doing business with, and it starts with a relationship. And you know, this is something too. I think a lot of dealers today are not really doing. They're not having like open and honest dialogues with their customers. Um, they're not even at some shows I've seen, they're not even looking up. Some of them look like they just don't care to be there, um, and that's kind of a problem because I want to build a rapport with my dealer, and I want to know that he's trustworthy, and I want him to know that I'm trustworthy as well. And this is something that I think we as a hobby need to work on. Uh, it, it it's really easy to destroy your reputation. It just takes seconds, but it takes a lifetime to build a good reputation. I don't want to cover every dealer like this. You know, you can't have a trustworthy dealer. Obviously, you can. Now, if you talk to Raul from AH Sports, uh, he really kind of uncovers a lot of bad things that happen in the hobby. And I don't think he's incorrect on a lot of this stuff. It's just that bad news travels quicker than good news. Or it's that saying, um, bad news travels around the world faster than good news can put on its shoes in the morning, and something to that effect. Uh, but for the most part, 90% of the hobby is decent. You only have maybe that 10% is not, and fraud happens everywhere, and it's not just in the hobby. It's also FTX, that scam. Wherever there's money to be made, you're going to find fraud. And that's a quote from Barry Halper, one of the biggest fraudsters I've heard of in the hobby, in fact. And if he hadn't passed away, as he did, he would have landed in jail. I'm pretty certain of that. He's another story for another time, of course. But getting back to Allen's, now we actually do know a lot about Allen's as a confectionery, and it goes back to 1891, and it was started by Alfred Weaver Allen, who was born in 1870 and he died in 1925. The company is really interesting. In fact, I really didn't have much of a problem trying to track down information on the company itself just because it's been around for such a long time. Most companies today, their shelf life is about 30 years or less. And this is something that has been gradually increasing over the last 50 years. So prior to, say, 1970, your average company lasted about 100 years. That was your average. Now companies are starting to go on a decline much more rapidly, and for a few reasons. Uh, the majority of companies actually, if they can operate in that first year, they may survive maybe 10 years. Um, but your corporations, in fact, they're about maybe 25 to 30 to 35 years, and that's it. And this actually has a lot to play into whether or not they're a card issuing company or not. Sometimes these cards are the only things that remain from the company. In this case, Allen's is actually still around. Again, it is now a very old company, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the company itself. So, Allen's actually, it was probably one of the most successful confectionery companies in Australia. Actually, in fact, it was the third largest candy company of its kind, and that was in 1909. And they were extremely successful. In fact, they took over eight other candy companies, including a dentist office, which is really kind of interesting to me. That's kind of pretty cool, actually. And why not, right? I mean, if you're selling candy, why not grab a dentist office as well, and you could create more revenue that way. But I think it would be considered a monopoly, in fact. I'm not sure what the laws are on monopolization in other countries, even in Canada or Australia or England. I don't think that they actually had the same rules as we do here. We have the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Act of 1914 as well. And then I think another act in 1937 to kind of codify all this stuff, all combined in 1917 as A.W. Allen Hardy Limited. And Allen didn't have a controlling interest in this entire organization, but he was the chairman and managing director. He did visit the United States in 1922, and that's when we start to see the three brands associated with these cards. And it is Irish Moss Jubals, Curum Quick, and then another one that I didn't actually write down, which I was, these things happen. There is actually an oil painting of Allen by F.E. Bowden. It's really sometimes very difficult to find photos of owners and really kind of any information on them. We got lucky in this case because the company, again, has been around for such a long time and it has such a storied history to it. So I was initially worried that there wasn't anything here, but I did find quite a bit. The company did go public in 1922, but it started to go downhill after Allen's passing in October of 1925. In fact, the company was bought out by Rothmans in 1985, and they sold it 2 years later in 1987 to Nestle, and they're still in business under Nestle. The inaugural set here is a set of 144 cards. And what I've kind of noticed about this particular set and the other set as well, the 1934, is that they're not really found in the greatest of condition. And this is a little unusual, I think, considering that, the British are really well known and famous for the fact that they've taken such great care of their cards in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and even 60s that uh, when I've noticed that these cards are really in poor condition or just horrible condition, not collector condition at all. And so I've kind of had to buy what I can find. And I always tell you guys to purchase what is available, and then maybe you can upgrade later. And these cards weren't really that expensive either. Maybe like $6 or $7, up to like 12 to 15. Right now, the American dollar has greater buying power than the Australian dollar, and so that conversion rate isn't going to kill you as much as it would for a card in England or Great Britain. You're actually paying more Great Britain than you are for cards in Australia. The set, as I said, consists of 144 cards, and there's a bunch of Hall of Famers here. Now, I was actually looking over the Hall of Fame itself, the Australian Football Hall of Fame, and it's just a little difficult, only for me because I'm still new at collecting uh, vintage football cards or soccer cards, if you will. I'm still trying to figure out who's actually in the Hall of Fame and who actually has cards. For me, this is actually really fun because I don't know everything. I don't want to know everything either, and that would really take the fun out of life. In fact, the Hall of Famers that I've instantly known in this set, and I'll just read them off to you. Laurie Nash, Harry Valance, Harry Collier, Sid Coventry, Gordon Coventry, and I'll talk to you a little bit about Gordon Coventry in a bit. Albert Collier, Bob Pratt, Reginald Hickey, Johnny Lewis, Hayden Bunton Sr., very famous ball player, very famous. Jack Titus, Wilfred Smallhorn, and I think there may be a few others. All these guys are in the Football Hall of Fame, and there's about 300 inductees. 32 of these guys are legends, and what that is it's a group of football players or soccer players who have had the greatest contributions to the sport. And right off the bat, Hayden Bunton Sr. and Gordon Coventry are legends, and I even believe that Bob Pratt is as well. And that only consists of maybe 5% of all the Hall of Famers in the Australian Football Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame itself was established in 1996 with 136 inductees, and now there's about 300 players altogether. This is actually kind of funny too that America actually has had soccer leagues going back to at least the 1910s, but there aren't any cards. There's also a American Soccer Hall of Fame here as well, and their inductees. Some of them go back to the 1910s and 20s and 30s, but we just don't really know about it. And if you're going to collect vintage soccer or football, the places that you're going to have to go to are, say, England, France, Germany, Australia, and maybe a few South American countries as well. But for the most part, we just don't have anything here. And I didn't even know that there was an American Soccer Hall of Fame or soccer leagues because baseball is the national pastime here, where soccer seems to be the national pastime of every other country on the earth. Soccer also, or football, if you will, it has the most amount of fans of any other sport too. But as I've told you guys before, is that just because it is a worldwide sport with the most fans doesn't mean that it's going to be popular here in the United States. and this is a really difficult thing for collectors or even fans, in fact, is that soccer is really not established here. Same thing with cricket too, and as I told you, that cricket was an established sport in the United States prior to the advent of baseball, and then baseball starts in about maybe 1831, and I know what Cooperstown says about that, and they're wrong. And they even and kind of admit that they're wrong too. But a lot of our original baseball players were at one point in time cricket stars. I guess baseball had a better publicist than cricket did, and then they also had financial ties to advertising where cricket did not, and cricket kind of died in the United States, and soccer as well in the United States. I can't really find a whole lot about it in the press in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, or even 40s and 50s. So it seems to be kind of non-existent. Now, in other countries, it is just one of the biggest sports that you can find, but this doesn't always translate to collectability. And even today, in fact, I wanted to branch out myself over the last 2 years, so I got into collecting vintage cricket and soccer and some tennis and boxing, which I've always loved. But the other thing too is I wanted to learn more about these sports and the players behind them. It's also a challenge. One of the things about collecting is the challenge aspect. If everything was easy, why would you do it, right? Um, that's the problem here that I had. It kind of made me think too, like when we're in high school, uh, we actually kind of start out with a clean slate. We might not always know what we want to do in life. And I'm transferring this one over to card collecting because sometimes we don't know how to start, right? In high school, when you're going into your profession or you're going into college for your profession, you really kind of need a place to start. You need people to help you out, kind of guide you along the way. And for me, getting into soccer or wanting to get into soccer or even hockey, I didn't know where to start. And so I didn't have any friends who collected either soccer or hockey cards, so I didn't do it. And that's one of the reasons why when I saw these cards about a decade ago or more, I didn't really pick them up because A, I didn't know who any of the players were. I didn't even know that there was a Hall of Fame for these players in other countries. And again, they were from another country. So that was my limitations. And eBay, I don't think was the way it was today back then, if that makes any sense. The internet is really only 20 years old. The modern internet, that is, things were a lot different. And I kind of wish that it would remained this way it was when we first had the internet back in, I'd say maybe the mid to late 90s. And that's as far back as I can remember the actual internet, the modern internet goes. eBay really kind of started out in the late 90s for the most part, and it has changed over the years. I think this is where eBay has gotten really good, and a lot of people have said that eBay is taken away from card shops, and it did. But if you look at the history of the hobby going back to the 1930s and 1940s, the only way that you could collect cards was that either your neighbors had sports cards or non-sports cards and they were willing to trade, or going into the 1930s and 40s, you had the postal service. And I've heard of stories where Jefferson Burdick or maybe John D. Wagner would trade in bulk uh, through the mail, and I think at some point that may have stopped. I read in a few of the articles that Jefferson Burdick wrote in the 1940s and 1950s, where he's stating that the postal system was changing their bulk rates, and it was actually becoming a little more difficult for collectors to basically trade, buy, sell in bulk through the postal service, and a lot of them were getting kind of worried too that the postal inspectors would open up these packages and there went your cards, or they would just get damaged. This is, an off topic here. A lot of these card collectors, especially Jefferson Burdick, would send out what are now extremely rare and valuable cards through the mail, and just for inspection, if you will. So he and John D. Wagner would actually send out their T206 Wagners to collectors that wanted to see them, and then they would in turn go through the mail again back to either Burdick or Wagner or Harry Lillian or whoever. And that kind of stopped once that these cards became more and more valuable. These cards here, um, you can probably pick them up for maybe about 7, 8, maybe $15. They're not that expensive, but they're not found here in the United States either. So they, in my estimation, they are kind of rare on that aspect. I actually don't see the 1934 set as often as the 1933 set. And the 1934 set is considered. The other thing I want to tell you too is half the set in the 1933 Allens is identical to the Turf cigarette set. And I did pick up a Turf as well, just to show you this is what one looks like. So there's also a corrected error as well in the 1933 set, and it's card number 122, which is Sid Baker, and his error is actually it says number 120, which should be Selwyn Baker instead, but this was corrected as well. The 1934 set is called the Flags set because uh, there are flags sitting on top of the player's head. These are cards that I don't really come across as often as I do the 1933 set. I'm not all that familiar with the card hobby in Australia or Great Britain, so I don't really understand the rarity rating or the pricing system for these cards. There are some really amazing ball players here in both of these sets. As I said before, Gordon Coventry, and I'm going to talk about Gordon Coventry in another video, but he is probably one of the greatest footballers of all time in his country, and he is not that expensive either. You can pick up a Gordon Coventry card like this for probably $6 or $7, not bad. And in another video, I'll tell you exactly why you probably want to add him to your collection. And again, Hayden Bunton Sr., I have found to be very difficult to track down because he is actually a lot more expensive than Gordon Coventry. And Gordon Coventry, I believe, is actually the first Australian football player to score 1,000 goals. There's also another set as well, which may be a little confusing. It is from the JJ Shoe Tobacco Company, and it's featuring Magpie cigarettes as their brand. And the players have heads. They're just a head of the player and what they call stars or bars. And it's a really interesting set. That's also from Melbourne, Australia as well. They say that's from 1921. I've heard from 1925 as well. The 1921 date is a little suspicious to me only because of the printing themselves. The printing of those particular cards is something I didn't think was possible in 1921. And the lithography, in fact, did change, especially in America, during the T206 reign, if you will, from like 1909 to 1913. And then from 1925, it changed again, as far as I remember. And you can see the difference in the lithography from the 1909 T206 to, say, the 1951 Bowman. If you look under a microscope, you can definitely see the printing style is completely different. The lithography is completely different, or what they say, the matrix. So I have a little bit of a problem with the 1921 date. And for a lot of cards, properly dating a card depends on the player, when they played, and what teams they were on. I don't really know a whole lot about these particular cards to know enough that, okay, that's the exact date. Sometimes we're still trying to figure this out, even 150 years after the card was issued. Is that the correct date that the card was issued? Could it have been issued at a different point in time? Anything is possible, especially with these cards. So, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it as always. If you have any comments or concerns, or just want to share your favorite cards, or if you know anything about these cards, I'm all ears. I always love to hear what you have to say. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by. I will talk to you later.